Welcome to the post-project world. I'm Luigi Rondanini. This is a special announcement episode. Over the next 18 months, 3 interconnected publications are coming that fundamentally reshape how institutional leaders think about organizational structure and governance. If you've been listening to this podcast, you know we've been exploring a central question. What happens to organizations when the project-based model breaks down? How do you govern when coordination becomes the dominant cost structure? How do you measure what you cannot see? These 3 publications answer that question, but they answer it at 3 different levels, and they're designed for 3 different audiences. Let me walk you through all 3, and let me explain why they matter if you sit on a board, if you lead financial operations, if you oversee risk governance, or if you're responsible for transformation in a regulated institution. Part 1. The Coordination Capital Doctrine. The first publication arrives on July 7th of this year. Its title is the Coordination Capital Doctrine. The subtitle is a measurement, governance, and structural doctrine for coordination capital. I want to be precise about that subtitle because it tells you everything about what this book is not. It is not a framework. It is not a methodology. It is not a collection of principles or practices or advisory suggestions. It is a specification, and that distinction matters profoundly to what this book accomplishes. For nearly 40 years, I have worked inside financial services institutions. I have watched organizations struggle with a problem they could not quite articulate. Governance structures that used to work are becoming impossibly costly. Committee meetings that provided clarity are now generating noise. Reporting systems that offered assurance are creating confusion. Regulators see it too. They ask about operational efficiency. They question compliance infrastructure bloat. They want to know whether governance burden is under active management. And what is missing is a shared vocabulary. A way to talk about this problem that is measurable, that is governable, that is not based on opinion or preference, but on structural analysis. The Coordination Capital Doctrine provides that vocabulary. It introduces the concept of coordination capital, that is the organizational burden created by the need to synchronize, approve, report on, and manage dependencies across your operation. It is real. It is measurable. It is a material line item in your cost base. The doctrine introduces the coordination capital ratio. That is your coordination capital divided by your total organizational cost. In most institutions, that ratio runs between 18 and 35%. That means up to 1/3 of your entire cost structure goes to making decisions and managing dependencies. And it introduces the structural floor. That is the minimum coordination capital your institution cannot reduce without violating regulatory requirements, breaking risk governance, or abandoning governance structures required by law. Below the floor, governance fails. Above the floor, you are carrying burden that might be unnecessary. The doctrine gives you the mathematics to calculate both. It gives you the language to have a conversation with your audit committee about whether your current structure is sustainable. The book is 46,000 words. It is hardcover. It is designed as a reference document. Institutional register. Not advisory. Specification. Street date is July 7th. But the doctrine itself does not answer the question that comes next. How do I actually implement this? That is where the second publication comes in. Part 2. The Coordination Capital Compendium. In May of next year, a second book arrives. The working title is The Coordination Capital Compendium. Subtitle: AI-Assisted Governance Implementation. This book is written for the CFO, the Audit Committee Chair, the Risk Officer, who has read the doctrine and is now asking, how do I measure this in my organization? How do I inventory coordination across thousands of people? How do I classify what I find? How do I create governance structures that interpret this data? How do I keep authority with humans while using AI to assist measurement? The compendium is 47,000 words, 14 chapters, 7 appendices. It is structured in 4 parts. Part 1 establishes why coordination capital measurement requires assistance. The scale problem is real. You cannot measure this manually. You need infrastructure. Part 2 specifies the measurement infrastructure itself: calendar analysis, evidence cataloging, classification automation, governance reporting. These are the 4 pillars of continuous coordination capital measurement. Part 3 moves from measurement to governance. How does a board use this data? How should audit committees interpret it? What governance structures actually work? And Part 4 connects implementation to strategy. How do you begin? What is the timeline? What should you expect? Let me be clear about something critical. The compendium is not about replacing governance judgment with artificial intelligence. It is about giving governance bodies the measurable data they need to make informed decisions about organizational structure. AI assists measurement. AI assists classification. AI assists reporting. But authority remains with humans. The audit committee decides what to do with this information. The board decides what structural changes follow. AI is subordinate to human governance. This matters because it is the difference between governance that remains accountable and systems that drift into autonomous optimization. The compendium arrives in May of next year. It is the operational manual for the doctrine. Together, they form a complete institutional offering. The doctrine says, here is what coordination capital is, and here is how to measure it. The compendium says, here is how to actually implement that measurement, and here is what governance structures support it. But there is a third book, and it is for a different audience entirely. Part 3, the Post-Project World Book. At the end of this year, we are publishing a book that some of you have already encountered as this podcast. The Post-Project World. This book is not about governance. It is about organizations. The Coordination Capital Doctrine is written for boards and CFOs. It is governance specification, institutional register. It speaks to financial leadership. The Post-Project World Book is written for operational leaders, COOs, CIOs, transformation leaders, anyone responsible for how work actually gets done. It answers a broader question. What happens to organizations when project-based governance breaks down and does not come back? How do you structure decision-making? How do you organize work? How do you lead through continuous adaptation instead of discrete delivery cycles? What skills do leaders need? How do you transition? What breaks in the old model and what emerges to replace it? This book is the narrative companion to the doctrine. The doctrine says, here is how to measure coordination capital governance. This book says, here is why that measurement matters, and here is what organizations look like when they move away from project-based models toward the structures that actually work in a post-project world. It is coming at the end of this year. So you have a spectrum, 3 entry points, 3 audiences. If you're a board member or an audit committee chair and you need to understand coordination capital governance quickly, you start with the compendium. It is accessible. It is practical. If you're a CFO and you need to operationalize measurement in your organization, you read the doctrine first to understand the specification, then the compendium to understand implementation. If you are a transformation leader or a COO and you need to explain the broader shift in organizational structure to your executive team, you read The Post-Project World. That book makes it intelligible. And if you are truly responsible for institutional governance, if you are the one accountable for how your organization manages its coordination burden, then you read the doctrine carefully. the way you would read a regulatory requirement or a system standard, because that is what it is. Why now? I want to step back and talk about timing, because we are at an inflection point. Over the last 3 years, institutional leaders have watched governance structures that worked for 2 decades become suddenly expensively broken. They have watched committee proliferation accelerate. They have watched reporting requirements fragment across systems. They have felt the weight of coordination burden without having a way to measure or talk about it. Regulators are pushing. They are asking questions about governance efficiency. They are examining operational structure. They want to see measurable discipline, not just procedural compliance. And what has been missing is a shared language, a way to make coordination visible, a way to make it governable. These 3 publications provide that language. Think about a typical mid-market regulated financial institution. £2 billion cost base. Coordination capital runs 18 to 22%. That is 360 to 440 million pounds every year just for the infrastructure of making decisions and managing dependencies. The question your board should be asking is this: is that your structural floor, or is that drift? Is 18% the minimum required to govern responsibly, or have you added 2 or 3% through committee proliferation, reporting redundancy, decision-making inefficiency? Because if you have drifted by 2%, you are burning £40 million a year on governance that does not need to exist. Your competitors, if they have understood this, might be running with a 16% ratio. That is a structural competitive disadvantage. Now imagine that across an entire industry. Institutions that measure this, that understand their coordination capital, that actively manage structural floor and coordination drift, are going to operate with a fundamental advantage. Not because they are smarter, but because they have made governance structure visible and measurable. These publications enable that visibility. They are coming because institutions need them now. What comes next? Let me be direct about what happens after publication. The doctrine arrives July 7th. Mark that date. Pre-order. Read it. Treat it with the seriousness you would give to a regulatory requirement, because it is one. The compendium comes in May of 2027. By that point, if you have adopted the doctrine language, you will understand what you are looking at. You will have context for implementation. The post-project workbook comes at the end of this year. If you are thinking about organizational transformation, if you are wondering whether your current structure can scale, this book gives you the map. But here is what I want to emphasize. Institutions that understand their coordination capital, that measure it, that actively govern it, are not just optimizing cost. They are creating the structural conditions under which humans can do meaningful work. Work that creates value. Work that requires judgment and creativity and genuine leadership, not just coordination overhead. The measurement is the foundation, but the real point is governance. And the real outcome is organizations where people can actually think. These publications are for institutions ready to take that seriously. Closing. I want to close with a simple statement. The post-project world is not coming. It is here. The organizations that have already made that transition are operating with a structural advantage that is no longer subtle. These 3 books are your guide to understanding what has changed, how to measure it, and what to do about it. The Coordination Capital Doctrine establishes the specification. The compendium operationalizes it. The post-project workbook makes it intelligible. Together, they form a complete picture of how institutions should govern, measure, and structure work in a world where coordination has become the dominant cost. Thank you for listening to the Post-Project World. I am Luigi Rondanini. The Coordination Capital Doctrine is available now for pre-order. Waterstones. Foils. All major booksellers. Street date is July 7th. Order now. The rest will follow.